You know, each president throughout history, Republican, Democrat, has something to teach all of us. And sometimes their lessons are cross party lines. A few years ago, though, I perhaps witnessed the greatest lesson of Abraham Lincoln when I was back in Washington, D.C. for a meeting. And about 5 years ago was the time they reopened the Soldiers' Home. The Soldiers' Home is about 3 to 5 miles away from the White House. And for those that love Lincoln, know that that is where he bathed himself in Shakespeare. It's where he marinated in the scriptures. It's where he rested and where he, along the path from the White House to the Soldiers' Home, most every night during the spring, summer, and early fall, on that route, he would pass people in slavery. And he got to know them. And that had a huge impact on who he was. And so the Soldiers' Home was something that I had read about many of times, and I had learned that it was just opening. And realizing that it was my last day in Washington, D.C., I was Googling the Soldiers' Home and realized it closed at 4 o'clock. My watch said it was 3:30. So I did what every good politician does, and I put my phone to my ear and walked out like I had an important phone call. Outside, I hailed down a cab, and I hopped in this cab, and I said, "Hey, mister." The guy goes, "Hey, where are you going today?" And I said, "Hey, mister, do you happen to know where the Soldiers' Home is?" And he said, "The Soldiers' Home? Of course I know where the Soldiers' Home is." And he gave me this dissertation on the history and the nooks and crannies of Washington, D.C. And he said, "No one knows this town like I do. And of course I know where the Soldiers' Home is, because my great-grandmother was a slave in this town." And so in his cab, he takes me on about the 5-minute cab ride. We pass Howard University. He talks extensively about Howard's impact in our country. And then we pull up to the Soldiers' Home. And literally the front door is about from where you are to where I am in the cab. And Earl was his name, and we had this cantankerous and very fun conversation going up. And I go to get out of the cab, and then I said, "Hey, Earl, have you ever been inside the Soldiers' Home?" And after he goes, "Well, no, I haven't." And I said, "Hey, Earl, do you know what was written? Do you know what Abraham Lincoln wrote in the Soldiers' Home?" And this man who was full of words was silent, and he just shook his head. I said, "Earl, somewhere in that home, President Lincoln penned the Emancipation Proclamation. That's why I want to see it. And given your history, I think you should come with me." "All right, fine. You just politicians think you can tell us all what to do." And so Earl parks the cab. We get out, and we walk up, and I put my hand on the front door of the Soldiers' Home. And with great anticipation, I turned the knob pretty hard, and it stopped because it was locked. And Earl goes, "Say, you politicians just think you can go wherever you want to go, and doors just open for you." I said, "Hold on, Earl, it's okay. I called. I told them we're coming." And so I called them again. I said, "Hey, we're at this door." They said, "Come around back." And so we came around back, and we walk in the big foyer, and they were expecting us. And I told them that I was a state representative from Washington State, and I told them no less than 3 times. But I think they got confused and thought I was a U.S. representative, and so we were about to get a very comprehensive tour. And they came down with this camera, and there's 3 people that are gathering around us, and they said, "Hey, we understand there's a VIP here today." And I was like, "Yes, there is. His name's Earl. His great-grandmother was a slave. And we came to see where the president wrote the Emancipation Proclamation." They gave us a very comprehensive 2-hour tour of the building, and they showed us where Lincoln read Shakespeare. They showed us his bedroom, and then they took us into this room, and they showed us exactly where they believe the Emancipation Proclamation was actually written. And they had a copy of it on a desk. And Earl walked in that room, and our cantankerous, fun conversation continued throughout the tour, except when we stepped into that room, it became silent. And I stood at the doorway, but Earl walked up and he just stared where it was written. And then a few minutes later, the tour continued. And then after 2.5 hours, they said, "We have one last thing to show you." And they took us in this little room that had a guard at the front door. And when we walked in, they said, "It just so happens that we have on loan from the White House the Emancipation Proclamation. And it was encased in about 2 inches of glass. And Earl walks in, a man who was so full of words, walks in, I'll never forget it. He walks to the side and he takes his hand and he just throws it down on top of the glass encasing the Emancipation. And he just stood at it. And I stared at him. And I said, Earl, this is what freed your great-grandmother. And all he could say was, I know, I know, I know. The tour ended, and Earl and I got in his cab, and he was taking me back to where the conference was. And he said, I'll never forget this, he goes, I don't know if you're a believing man or not, but this was a day from God. And I thought, you couldn't be more right, Earl. And I'm a little guy from the Northwest, and I got the greatest history lesson I ever could have had, not from a professor, not from a PhD, but a cab driver whose name was Earl, who showed me what it looks like when a legacy endures. And maybe if the President Lincoln on his 207th birthday this year were to give us words, maybe it would be something like, I don't want you guys as a body focused on today. I want you thinking about tomorrow. And I want you as a body not just focused on your generation, I want you to be mindful and thoughtful about the next. And maybe Lincoln would say something like, I don't want you to be just focused on getting to common ground, but I want you to get to higher ground. Because maybe someday, one of us in this room will write or author a bill that's felt by an individual who might be a cab driver 100 years from now or 50 years. And maybe the whole reason why we're even here is because there are Earls in this world that depend on us, not to work in political ideology, but to work from principle and conviction. The Earls in this country have never needed it more than they need it today. Thank you.